Okay.
Yeah, so extraterrestrials for decades have been identifying people, families, genetic lines for material that would be suitable for what we really can think of as emergency services personnel. I know people who have dreams that, there's a massive event, where there's spaceships or there's an invasion or something, and they're just directing traffic. They're just pointing people down there. No, everybody go that way, go that way. They're just directing traffic. Or they're having dreams that are like, oh, I have these 10 people that I have to get from point A to point B to get them to safety. So all these people are pre-programmed with these sort of emergency services personnel programs, so that if something were to go weird, there would literally be millions of people who would be activated and would instantly know, oh, I know how to dress a wound, I know how to, get these people out of here, I know how to stop this, get in the middle of that, get people to safety here, help, treat medical injuries here. I mean, they've got that, again, that sleeper agent kind of programming, but it's just in case something really crazy happens and you need millions of people to just rise to the occasion to mitigate the damage of the process. And so, yeah, I have no idea the actual numbers, but we're probably talking more than tens of millions or potentially hundreds of millions of people that are those types of, sleeper people. But again, this is not a harmful or a dangerous thing. They're just there to help in case something goes weird. Yeah.
Have you heard about mass abduction being done earlier here on Earth? Because if I can just, we've been investigating a case in Montreal that happened in 1990.
Okay.
And it turns out there was a lot of people that had missing time.
Oh, okay.
And then I met with a woman that were actually one of the sleeper agents.
Right.
And she told me that she remembered helping people going to the ship.
Right.
And she was not human at that time. She was a human,
sure,
but she's been brought somewhere, and then she was
sure,
kind of different, and
sure,
then she helped people getting aboard a huge ship, right in downtown Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a lot of people that have seen this ship,
mm-hmm,
but it was all covered up,
right,
after. But the investigation just leads us toward a mass abduction. So,
right,
you know anything about?
So mass abductions are certainly way more rare than individual or family abductions. So individual or family abductions occur more often than any other type. Mm-hmm. Mass abductions can occur, but again, they're very less frequent. They're very rare, but they certainly can occur. I don't know that I have a specific comment to make about that, other than, yeah, that can happen. Okay. I mean, from what we know, that can definitely happen. It does happen. It's just more rare than single individual or family abductions.
But do you know about the purpose of that? Or?
You would have to give me some details about the case. We would have to talk details about the case,
okay,
and then I could, whatever I don't know, I can ask my people about, and then I can come back to you with something. So if you want to share that information with me, I can see what I can get for you.
Oh,
but
okay, yeah, I'll do.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll be happy to do that.
Okay. So, can you go back now and when you were for the Mars Defense Force and you were fighting, how long you've been for? You said 17 years?
I was there 17 years, okay. Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time. It was the second home, for sure.
So, but you didn't like Curry Good regressed and... No, so you.
Yeah, no. I was definitely regressed. I mean, I was 37 years. I mean, I was older than, I was over 37 years old. It was probably my 40s when I was returned from my tour of duty to 17 years old back in 1987. So yeah, to live.
So you start a real life. I mean, in 1987, back to your 17 years old, and then. But before that, you went to normal school also?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean it's typical procedure is to take a person to do their tour, which we often refer to or think of as 20-year tours. They can be longer. I have found out recently through more memory regressions that I served probably closer to 30 years than 20 years. That's been an interesting process, believe me. So anywhere from 20 plus years can be the amount of time for a tour of duty. That person will perform that tour of duty to the end, then at the end be sent back to Luna Operations Command for what is referred to as a memory wipe, but it's not a wipe, it's a repression. If I were to wipe your memory, I would blank your hard drive. You would know nothing. You wouldn't know how to speak, you probably wouldn't know how to walk, you wouldn't know how to feed yourself. Like if I really wiped your brain, like you would know nothing. So to take all of that information that's in people's heads, you can't just wipe it out. That's not how the brain works. That's not how memory works. What you can do is you can suppress it. You can bury it. That's the best you can hope for without completely blanking out someone's brain. And the other thing they do is they call age regression, but it's not really age regression because that would be taking the body that I have and making it younger again. What they really do is they crack out a younger clone version of yourself and then transfer your consciousness into the clone version and then take your old body and drop it in the incinerator.
Is that what they've done with you? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, this is at least my second physical body, but probably more than that. So I've probably been through more than a half a dozen or more physical bodies.
So because when you're combat and you got wounded or...
Oh yeah, arms blown off, legs blown off. Oh yeah, I've had my arms and legs blown and ripped off hundreds of times, hundreds and hundreds of times.
Okay. And have you seen any of your colleagues get hurt or died when you were...
Oh yeah, oh my God, it was a bloodbath. It was just an absolute bloodbath. Oh yeah, just like I said, arms and legs being ripped off, blown off, torn off. It was awful.
And there was no way to deal with it diplomatically? I mean...
Well, that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to test military hardware. Well, you don't want to make peace when you're trying to develop military hardware. That defeats the purpose of developing military hardware. If you're trying to build better military hardware, peace isn't good for business.
Oh, yeah, okay, so...
I mean, I'm not saying I agree with that position philosophically. I'm just saying that's the way that it is. And the way that it was then, for sure.
Okay. So, and then, where have you been? I mean, okay, you've been to Mars.
Yep.
And where else?
Been around the solar system and been out of the solar system a few dozen times. So, I mean, I've kind of been all over, really.
And have you been, I mean, in the belt between Mars and Jupiter?
Sure. Oh, yeah, the asteroid belt. Yeah, I've been by there a few times. It's nice.
So what's there?
A lot of shiny objects. So, I mean, I've only seen it from, I mean, probably the closest we were was a couple miles away. I mean, we got within a couple of miles of it, but we were ordered very clearly not to get too close because even though you're able to see all of these large objects floating through the belt, there are lots of smaller objects that you don't see. And so the closer you get, the increased chance you get that a small object could hit you and possibly do damage. Now, we're in vehicles that have shielding on them that are supposed to protect us from this sort of thing, but you don't go inviting accidents and injuries, so we were told to keep a safe distance of some number of miles. Interestingly enough, you have lots of debris that's floating in a stream. What a lot of that debris is doing is moving. So you don't necessarily have a lot of objects that are moving still in a straight line. What you have is you have objects that are turning, spinning, moving around as they're moving in the gravitational field of the circle, right, as they go around. So at a distance, what you see is all of these little objects rolling around, spinning, moving around. Sometimes they knock back and forth. Something can come in and hit something and knock things around and create this interesting little, physical effect. So, and for whatever reason, a lot of these debris particles were either broken or sheared off in such a way that they have a lot of flat, smooth surfaces on them, multiple. So as they spin and light hits off of them, they sparkle. So as you have all of these objects rolling around, moving, from a distance you have this little sparkly effect that's happening as you're looking at the objects floating through the asteroid belt. Same thing's true with the rings of Saturn, actually. So when you get up close to it, it's just this amazing, slow-moving river of spinning, sparkly rocks.
So do you know where that comes from?
Well, I mean, we understand from the history that we've been given of what we think happened there. So you had a planet that was occupying the space of the asteroid belt, and then when which the Sumerians called Tiamat. Then the planet Marduk came in, which is also sometimes referred to the 12th planet. Anyone who's a fan of Zecharia Sitchin or is interested in this subject, I highly recommend reading Zecharia Sitchin's books on the subject, because I think he's done a better job at pulling out of this information through the ancient Sumerian text than anybody. But from what we understand from that is Tiamat, which was a water planet, not unlike our own planet Earth, which was occupying that space. Marduk comes in, has, I don't know, what is it, 10, 11, 13 moons that are swirling around. So basically, as these two planets are about to collide and they're getting closer and closer and closer, well, these moons are spinning around, you know, out here. So before Marduk actually hits Tiamat, the moons collide with Tiamat, breaking it apart, shattering it into pieces, and then Marduk barrels through it, and it severs off a chunk of water planet which supposedly slipped into Earth orbit and became the planet that we're standing on right now. And the remainder of Tiamat is in broken rocks and ice, because a lot of it was water. So when it hit space, I mean, it instantly froze and turned into blocks of ice and rock and so forth, and that's mostly what's floating around.
Oh, okay. And beside Moon and Mars, are there any other places on the solar system that are inhabited?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. Let's see. Venus is inhabited. Mars is inhabited. There are at least 3 other celestial bodies in our solar system which are inhabited, but all of a sudden I feel like I'm not supposed to mention what they are. But let's just say let's just say they're probably Europa, Io, and Neptune.
Okay. Okay. And so you've been through the solar system?
I've been all over. Yeah.
Okay. And outside, where? Where have you been?
I've been to a number of systems outside the planet. So I was stationed on a ship called the Farragut. The Farragut was a special forces ship, which basically a transport vehicle, which had like 18 different special forces units that were stationed on that ship. So the Farragut gets assigned to different conflicts and different interests that we have, either in our own solar system or outside of our solar system. And I will say that interests outside of the solar system can involve trade routes, trade agreements that we have with other species, other worlds. It can involve assisting another species militarily if they're being attacked and they don't really have the wherewithal to defend themselves. They can come to us and say, hey, we would really like some help, and then we say, all right, it's going to cost you this much. Like, we can send you the people, but it's going to, you know, it doesn't cost us $0.00 to send a spaceship full of, you know, specially trained special forces soldiers, so we can't give it to you for free, but yeah, we'll be happy to help you out, but here's what it's going to cost. And most worlds that we have those arrangements with are more than happy to pay the price, because it turns out that, again, as human beings, we're really good at what we do, and we're very good at war making, and we're very good at kicking the crap out of people, and we're very good at making destructive weaponry. So we've taken that into space with us, and we're intergalactic arms merchants now, and we now peddle intergalactic military hardware and personnel to whoever needs it or whoever's willing to pay for it.
Okay.
Again, I'm not necessarily saying I fully support that philosophical belief. That is just where we're at. It's just stating where we are.
And have you heard about, because again, with the people, the witnesses that are coming forward, from what I've learned is that in the 90s, there was a lot of abductions, and those people were abducted to be bred,
Right.
and then they took the fetuses out, and then one of the experiencers saw actually an army of clones,
Right.
and she felt that they were warriors.
Right.
So they were building armies or tall grays, something
Yeah.
like that. And so were they involved with the Earth's Defense Force, or what?
That could have been a program that could have been loosely associated with a military program, or that could be an extraterrestrial program in and of itself. So, I mean, we have...
She saw, actually, she saw a military,
Okay.
a tall human guy,
Okay.
and she also saw, tall grays and small grays, and
Yeah, that would indicate that it's a cooperative program between us and other species. Yeah, it's an intergalactic program.
so, but it seemed, because here, in Quebec, there was so many abductees that in the McGill University, they did a project to study that, and they thought it was in the minds of the people, and then they saw, oh my God, that was real, and they just shut it quietly so people won't know about it. But from my point of view, is like in these years they needed a lot of clones. There was something go on out there, I don't know what, but
Yeah.
in the 90s they needed a lot of them.
Yeah. So I can tell you there was a period of time that would actually coincide with that in the 90s when I was in the MDF, when we needed a lot more manpower. And it was right about at the beginning of the draconian invasion. And we just didn't have the resources to meet what we knew we needed to meet on the battlefield, just man for man. So someone's bright idea was that we would take the soldiers that we have, a lot of these augmented, genetically engineered soldiers like myself, and then they would introduce clone infantry, which would be trained and commanded under the other military personnel, which was us. So I got to be a drill instructor. I got to drill clone units and try and train them up to spec on a regular basis. And all I can tell you is that training clones is a disaster. Clones don't have full consciousness, so their attention span is very short. Their discipline level is incredibly low. Their focus and attention is very low. So they're very, very difficult to train. They're very ill-disciplined, and they tend to harm themselves and harm others and have friendly fire issues way more often than other soldiers. So they're essentially like you're taking a meat suit, with barely a brain in it that barely functions, that has no human consciousness to it. So there's no Jiminy Cricket in there. There's no conscience. There's nothing to tell you what's right and wrong. There's nothing to give you a moral center or an ethical center of programming. So clones are horrible as far as trying to deal with as soldiers. But it's not that people don't keep trying. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's some people who have this idea, clone army, yes, that will be the best thing ever. On paper, maybe that looks pretty good. In real life, a clone army turns out to be a disaster. So I don't know how, but people still keep trying it. People still keep attempting it. And sometimes it's a cost benefit, cost loss, gain loss sort of sheet where you can say, well, it costs us this much to, engineer and train 100,000 clones, and we can send them to do this job, and it kind of worked, and it was better that we spent that much money than we spent some other amount of money. So on somebody's bean counter sheet, it might still work out, like, yeah, clone army, that could work. But it's mostly a bad idea. It's mostly just a bad idea. But the 90s would have been the peak time when people were thinking, yeah, clone army, we can do it, come on, clone army, clone army. There's a reason why, episode 2 from the Star Wars series from George Lucas was called the Clone Wars. There was a reason why that movie happened. And I will suggest, while not trying to say that the fictional series there is a true-to-life story, I would say that it is woven with a tremendous amount of truth. People certainly knew, there were certainly people who knew that it was part of their job to give George Lucas good information. I will also suggest that George Lucas has spent his life digging and has met some people and learned some things. And so, he created a storyline that was not so far off from the storyline that we were living in real life. I mean, if you were people who were paying attention to what was happening in American politics, when all of a sudden you have this, Sith Lord Emperor rising up and taking over the Senate and essentially, this sort of covert coup d'etat, there was a lot that was happening in American politics that was reflecting that as a mirror. That was very much a mirror too. So I would suggest that there's a lot of truth in there because a lot of people put truthful information into the pipeline, into Mr. Lucas's brain before he decided to create his magnum opus of all of these films. But there's a lot of truth woven into them for sure. And so, Clone Wars, it was a big thing for a while. They certainly put a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of energy into it. And in the 90s, that's the time period.
Okay. And when you went outside the solar system, was that with the same ships, or was there any difference in the ships, or?
I was still stationed on the Farragut. So the Farragut is essentially a transport ship, which houses and transports special forces units. I like to think of it as a giant flying Swiss Army knife. So depending on what you need, depending on what tool you need, which flick you pull out of the Swiss Army knife, depending on which team you pull out of the Farragut to send them to go do something. So it was kind of like a giant flying Swiss Army knife. That was really specific. We would go somewhere, engage in something that was a very specific conflict, usually between very specific parties. More often than not, my job was rescue and or termination of high-value targets. So more often than not, we were sent into a location with photographs, names, genetic identifiers to identify a person that we needed to identify and rescue, or that we needed to identify and kill. So either a high-value target that they wanted to save or a high-value target that they wanted dead. And that was mostly what we did, was retrieve high-value targets and or terminate high-value targets.
On other places where you've been, is there the same kind of hush-hush situation about what's really going on? I mean, on Mars, for example,
I would say
how many
that
people are there?
Well, we're not sure. The last time when the census was being conducted for the colonies on Mars, which was, where are we now? It would have been about 2014, 2015, about 2015, I think. There was an attempt to do a census so that we could get the actual number of bodies that were in the colonies. The numbers were approaching about 10 million. Like we were counting, calculating, we were getting to a number that was close to 10 million. And then there was a worker revolt. And so since a lot of the workers in the colonies were essentially being treated as slave labor, they're not being treated as workers who were given a living wage and being able to take care of their families. In many cases, you had family units of mother, father, and 3 to 5 children living in a single room this big with bunk beds, right? I mean, this is where a worker unit would live, with their mom and the dad, and the kids would live in a room.
What do they do?
They work. They're slave labor. They work. They work all day. They build things, manufacture things, dig things, mine things, mine water, raise pigs, raise vegetables, dig minerals, or manufacture material to sell.
Are they above ground or
All below ground.
below
All
ground?
below ground, yeah.
Okay.
You can breathe and exist on the surface, but the windstorms really make it difficult to
Okay.
like just build a log cabin or a shack or something and survive
So
on
are
the
the
surface.
humans there are from there, or they've been brought there, or?
This is an interesting point. So since most of the people who were brought there in the early mid-1970s, you have a majority of the people who live there now who were born there. They were born there. They're Martians. They're not Earthlings. They were born there. But because they still keep taking people and sending them there, you have this kind of, because of personnel shortages, they don't have enough people, you do have this continual trickle of Terrans, terrestrial Earthlings, being brought to the colonies and integrated, or what we say repatriated into the colonies. That's on a regular basis. But because you have 2 generations or 3 generations that have been living there now, you have a lot of people that were born there, raised there, don't know anything ever different. In fact, most of them have been told that we're all dead, that there's no life here, that nobody here, no reason to come back here, it's all poison, radiation, everything's dead, it's all dead. And that was actually what prompted the beginning of the worker revolt, was when some of these workers found out that, hey, there's some people still on planet Earth. They're not all dead. We've been lied to, and got a little upset about that. And word got around, and next thing you knew, it was worker uprisings across the colonies. So we don't know what the population is right now.
So what happened there? I mean, when the revolt broke out,
Oh God!
Was there any people being shot at, or?
Oh my gosh!
I mean, there's an army there.
Yeah, here's what we can tell from what we know. What we were able to observe from a distance, from satellites and imaging from spacecrafts and so forth, we were able to tell what was happening. There were some massive explosions, which we think were set. We don't think that they were accidental. We think that there were power plants, nuclear power plants that blew up, that went, critical. There were industrial weapons manufacturing plants that were destroyed, that blew up. There were train tunnels and transportation systems that were blown up. Large sections were isolated from one another so that certain personnel could protect themselves in an area, and they could think about, okay, if we blow up this train tunnel, we blow up that train tunnel, the only way they can come in is that way. So then we've got a bottleneck. No one can surprise us from the flanks. They can only come in from that one tunnel. So some of it was tactical. But in some cases, some of the damage was so severe that there were huge sections of some of the colonies that lost life support, food, water, and oxygen supplies for potentially weeks or months. So we can only presume, from what we know, from a little bit of what we've been able to get from remote viewing, which interestingly enough seems to be blocked. So someone is intent on using their own psionic specialist to prevent our psionic specialists from remote viewing what's happening. But what we think occurred is that the initial rash of violence and explosions shifted the balance of power between different worker groups, worker revolt groups, the governor administrators, police forces, and military forces. But really, you're talking about security forces at the colonies. The military wasn't in the colonies. We were way outside the perimeter of the colonies. We weren't allowed anywhere near the colonies. So the colonies aren't really using the military, per se. Right? They're able to use their own security forces. They're able to sort of work this out themselves. But the military is kind of like this outer perimeter, keeping everything out from them to get to them, but not necessarily engaging or helping one way or the other. It turns out because the ICC, the International Corporate Conglomerate, doesn't really care whether their manufacturing facilities are run by a fascist governor of a police state, or whether it's run by a communist worker party that revolted from being slaves. They don't care. All they care about is who makes the quotas. If that factory keeps making the quotas, fine, you're okay. You know, so the ICC basically, you know, stepped back, was like, hands off, well, you guys sort this out. We only care who can make the quotas, so we consider this a personal problem that you got to sort out, but then whoever ends up being in power, we'll negotiate with to get the quotas at the factories back going so that we can keep our trade contracts so that we don't lose billions of dollars. But they didn't have an interest to just immediately rush in and like stomp down and suppress these revolts, so they just kind of let it happen. So in the weeks and months superseding the initial violence, we think that potentially tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people died from starvation, dehydration, or lack of oxygen. I mean, probably just lack of ability to have food, water, and air. So we don't know who's left. We don't know how many people are left. We don't even know what the political structure is of all of the colonies at the moment. We don't know. We have some information, and some of that information is such that we don't consider it reliable enough for me to say this is what we know.
Okay.
Right? We think we know some things.
So what was the date? I mean,
Again, about 2015.
Okay.
I'd have to actually, if you wanted a
No,
more accurate,
okay.
I'd have to like look at my calendar and try and
Okay.
figure out when that was, but it was about 2015, late 2014, early 2015.
So, wow.
Yeah, so we don't know. So yeah, I mean, there was we are pretty sure that the attempt of the Russians to drop a probe on Mars right after that, right after the worker revolt, there was this attempt for the Russians to drop a probe. We're pretty sure it was a communications probe. The whole point was to drop, you know, essentially a phone line down on the ground that someone can come up to and pick up and communicate with. So they were hoping to communicate with someone, some of the remnants of those in the colonies, so that they could communicate and find out what happened. Now, for whatever reason, the Russians have decided to keep a lot of their information to themselves lately. Looks like they're making a power play.
So, but you talked before that the Russians and the US are working together?
They've been cooperating for some time, but it's just not right to say that they're best friends who love each other and want the best for each other and will never stab each other in the back. These are two groups of people that are cooperating with each other because it serves their interests and they get something out of it, but they're still competitive with one another, and they still spy on each other, and they still poison each other, and they still assassinate each other every once in a while. And so there does appear to be some kind of a power play at the moment. And,
So,
you know, they're...
You want a piece of intel?
Oh, please, tell me what you got.
About Russian program?
Please.
Okay, I might
Oh,
do that after.
off the record, it's up to you.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's so much information that it's like way above what I was thinking.
Usually when people sit down to interview me, we talk for a couple hours and they say, oh my God, we could talk for so many more hours. And I'm like, yeah, we totally could. So, yeah.
Yeah. But is there anything else you want to add, you know, for people that are new to this and what they